Humans were about to be wiped off the planet Zephyria in a bloody genocide, as the last human fortress was about to fall to the invading insectoid Mizarians, until a forgotten ship arrived from Earth, carrying humanity's most ancient and terrifying allies. The battle had been long. Humans were losing the war. The dimly lit bunker was filled with the stench of Karos and Xanth, two Mizarian soldiers. They huddled around a flickering holographic map, looking over the positions of their forces surrounding the human fortress. Karos, an older soldier, was missing an antenna. His carapace was crisscrossed with scars from many battles. He gestured to a flashing red icon on the map. "Look, Xanth. The humans have retreated to this fortress. It is the last bastion of their resistance on Zephyria. Our forces are ready to strike the final blow and end their occupation of our rightful planet." Xanth, a younger, less battle-hardened Mizarian, hesitated before speaking. "I have heard rumors, Karos. The humans may have a secret weapon, something ancient and deadly they brought from their home world." "Nonsense," scoffed Karos, his mandibles clicking with derision. "We have driven the humans back at every turn. Their primitive technology cannot stand against our plasma rifles and energy shields. These are the stories of gullible hatchlings, not soldiers." Xanth persisted. "The humans come from a planet called Earth. It was said to be a death world teeming with terrifying beasts that could rip through even the strongest Mizarian armor like it was made of leaves. If those monsters were to join the battle..." "If the humans had such powerful creatures, they would have used them by now," snapped Karos, shaking his head. His compound eyes glinted with annoyance in the hologram's eerie glow. "These are myths to frighten us, nothing more. Tomorrow we will overrun the humans' pathetic last defense. Zephyria will be claimed for the Mizarian Empire forever, and every human will be dead or enslaved. Now rally the troops. We attack their fortress at dawn, and we will not stop until every human breathes their last." As the two Mizarians left to gather their soldiers and prepare for the final assault, a streak of light burned across the night sky over the human fortress. It grew larger and larger, until it resolved into the shape of a small transport ship, emblazoned with the ancient symbol of Earth. The ship hurtled toward the ground and disappeared behind the human defenses. The humans in the fortress, watching the spacecraft plummet through the atmosphere, cheered with sudden hope. The Mizarians saw it too, but they did not understand. They could not hear the sounds that began to echo from within the human fortress walls, the growls and roars of beasts that had been the apex predators on ancient Earth for longer than the Mizarian civilization had existed. They could not imagine that the humans' homeworld had contained such monsters, or that those monsters would eagerly fight alongside their human masters again, after so many centuries. All the Mizarians knew for certain was that tomorrow, one way or another, the battle for Zephyria would end. As the unearthly howls echoed across the battlefield, Coleman stepped back from the wall, a hint of a smile on his weathered face. The two Mizarians stood in stunned silence for a moment, their troops shifting nervously behind them. Xanth turned to Karos, his voice trembling. "Those sounds, they're like the stories of the great beasts that roamed the earth in ancient times. Could it be true?" Karos shook his head, trying to maintain his composure. "Impossible. Those are just myths, stories to frighten hatchlings. There's no way the humans could have brought such creatures here." Another chorus of howls and roars erupted from within the fortress, louder and more terrifying than before. The Mizarian soldiers began to murmur and whisper among themselves, their earlier confidence rapidly eroding. Coleman's voice boomed out again, filled with a newfound strength. "You hear that, Mizarians? That's the sound of Earth's mightiest allies, ready to fight alongside us once more. They remember the bond we shared on our homeworld, and they've come to honor that ancient pact." Xanth's antennae twitched nervously. "Karos, what if he's telling the truth? What if the humans really do have these legendary creatures on their side?" Karos's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of his growing unease. "We can't back down now. We've come too far to let some human tricks frighten us away from victory." The ground began to tremble beneath their feet, a steady rhythm that grew stronger with each passing second. The fortress gates slowly creaked open, revealing a sight that made even the bravest Mizarian warrior take a step back in fear. Emerging from the shadows of the fortress were massive, snarling beasts, their bodies rippling with powerful muscles beneath thick fur and armored scales. They moved with a predatory grace, their eyes gleaming with a feral intelligence that spoke of countless generations of hunting and survival on Earth's unforgiving landscapes. Xanth's eyes widened in disbelief. By the Great Mother, they're real. The war beasts of Earth are real. Karos could only stare in mute horror as the creatures lined up alongside the human defenders, their fangs bared in a clear challenge to the Mizarian invaders. For the first time in his long military career, he felt the icy grip of true fear closing around his heart. Coleman's voice rang out once more, filled with a fierce pride. "Behold the spirit of Earth, Mizarians. These noble beasts have fought alongside us since the dawn of our species, and they will fight with us again today. They are more than just animals. They are our partners, our friends, and our family, and they will never let us fall." Xanth stared in awe as the massive war beasts tore through the Mizarian ranks. The dire wolves were a blur of fur and fangs, their riders guiding them with practiced ease. The cries of the fallen Mizarians filled the air, mixing with the snarls and howls of the wolves. Karos's orders were drowned out by the chaos of the battle. He watched helplessly as his troops fell back, their weapons useless against the ancient creatures. He turned to Xanth, his voice strained with disbelief. "How could we have been so wrong about the humans? We thought they were weak, but they had these monsters hidden away all along." Xanth shook his head, his antennae quivering with fear. "They didn't just have them hidden, Karos. They brought them back from extinction. The humans have a bond with these creatures that goes beyond anything we could have imagined." As they spoke, a dire wolf broke through the Mizarian lines, its rider bearing down on the two soldiers. Karos raised his weapon, but the wolf was too fast. It leaped at him, its jaws closing around his arm. Karos screamed as the creature's teeth punctured his exoskeleton, the pain unlike anything he had ever experienced. Xanth moved to help, but the human rider was already upon him. The warrior's energy blade sliced through Xanth's weapon, rendering it useless. Xanth stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror as the wolf released Karos and turned its attention to him. "Please, no," Xanth begged, raising his hands in surrender. "We didn't know. We didn't understand the power of your bond with these creatures." The human rider paused, his eyes narrowing beneath his ancient helmet. "You sought to wipe us out, to take our world for your own. But you failed to understand the depth of our connection to Earth and all its creatures. That was your mistake." Karos, clutching his wounded arm, looked up at the human. "We see that now. The stories of Earth's war beasts were true. We should have never underestimated your species." The rider nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Remember this day, Mizarians. Remember the power of Earth's spirit and the unbreakable bond between humans and the creatures who fight alongside us. For as long as that bond endures, we will never be defeated." With that, the rider urged his wolf forward, leaping back into the fray. Karos and Xanth watched as the battle raged on, the dire wolves and their human companions driving the Mizarian forces back with every passing moment. They knew then that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit, and they knew that they would never make the mistake of underestimating Earth and its inhabitants again. As energy blasts sizzled through the air around them, Karos and Xanth huddled behind the meager cover of the rocky outcropping. The dire wolves closed in, their riders guiding them with a synchronicity that spoke of an ancient bond. "I still don't understand," Karos said, his voice strained with a mix of fear and frustration. "How could mere animals turn the tide of a war?" Xanth, his compound eyes reflecting the chaos of the battle, turned to his companion. "It's not just the animals, Karos. It's the bond they share with the humans, a bond that goes beyond mere training or domestication." Karos fired off another plasma burst, the weapon's charge dwindling with each shot. "What are you talking about? How could a bond between a human and a beast be that powerful?" "The stories say that the humans and their canine companions evolved together over thousands of years," Xanth explained, his tone almost reverent. The humans shaped the dogs, breeding them for the traits they needed: loyalty, intelligence, courage, and in return the dogs became more than just animals. They became partners, guardians, and even warriors. Karos shook his head, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. "You're saying these war beasts are the result of some kind of co-evolution? That the humans and their dogs are somehow linked on a deeper level?" Xanth nodded, wincing as a stray energy blast scorched the rock beside him. "That's exactly what I'm saying. The humans and their dogs are more than just master and pet. They're a team, a unit bonded by centuries of shared history and mutual dependence." "But how could such a bond allow them to fight like this?" Karos demanded, gesturing to the dire wolves and their riders, who moved as one across the battlefield. How could it give them the strength to challenge an entire army? "Because it's not just a bond of convenience or necessity," Xanth said, his voice filled with a strange mix of awe and envy. "It's a bond of love, Karos, a love that transcends species and time itself. And that love, that unwavering devotion, is what drives these creatures to fight alongside their human companions, no matter the odds." Karos fell silent, his gaze fixed on the dire wolves as they tore through the Mizarian lines. For a moment he saw them not as enemy combatants, but as something else, a testament to the power of a bond that he, as a Mizarian, could scarcely comprehend. "Love," he murmured, the word feeling strange and alien on his tongue. Could such a thing really be the key to their strength? Xanth, his own eyes locked on the battle, could only nod. "It would seem so, Karos. It would seem that the humans have unlocked a power far greater than any weapon or technology, the power of a bond that even we, with all our advancements, have yet to truly understand." Xanth stared at Coleman, his compound eyes wide with astonishment. "You mean to tell us that these war beasts, these dire wolves, chose to follow you across the stars? That they willingly endured the hardships of space travel to be by your side?" Coleman nodded, his hand resting on the massive wolf's shaggy head. "They did. They knew, just as we did, that our bond was unbreakable, that we were meant to face the challenges of this new world together, as we had on Earth for so many centuries." Karos, his disbelief warring with a grudging respect, lowered his weapon slightly. But how could they have known? How could mere beasts comprehend the vastness of space, the dangers of colonizing a new planet? The dire wolf, as if understanding the Mizarian's words, turned its head to fix Karos with a piercing gaze. Coleman chuckled softly. "You underestimate them, Karos. These are no mere beasts. They are the product of millennia of evolution, of a bond that has shaped both our species in ways we are only beginning to understand." Xanth, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear, took a tentative step closer to the wolf. "The co-evolution you spoke of earlier, it's more than just a theory, isn't it? It's the key to your success, both on Earth and here on Zephyria." Coleman smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. "It is. Our ancestors may have been the ones to take the first steps towards domestication, but over time the wolves began to shape us as well. They taught us loyalty, courage, and the power of working together as a pack. In return, we gave them a place by our side, a purpose that extended beyond mere survival." Karos, his mind reeling with the implications of Coleman's words, shook his head slowly. "And now, after all this time, they have chosen to stand with you once again, to fight a war that is not their own, on a world that is light years from the one they called home." "But it is their own, Karos, just as it is ours." Coleman's voice was soft but filled with a quiet determination. "When we left Earth, we carried with us the spirit of our world, the essence of the bond that had sustained us for so long. And when the wolves found us here, they recognized that spirit, that unbreakable connection that had endured across the centuries and the stars." Xanth, his voice hushed with a newfound respect, looked out over the battlefield where the dire wolves and their human companions continued to push back the Mizarian forces. "They fight for you, for the bond you share, not out of obligation or instinct, but out of love." Coleman nodded, his eyes shining with a fierce pride. "And that, Exanth, is why we will never surrender, why we will never stop fighting for this world, for the future we know we can build here, because we carry with us the strength of Earth, the power of a bond that even the vastness of space could not break." Kairos, his weapon lowering to his side, looked at Coleman with a mix of awe and understanding. The stories were true then, the legends of Earth's war beasts, of the unbreakable bond between human and wolf, and now here on Zephyria, those legends have come to life once again. Coleman smiled, his hand tightening on the dire wolf's fur. "They have, Kairos, and as long as that bond endures, as long as the spirit of Earth lives on in our hearts and in the hearts of our wolves, we will never be defeated." Coleman smiled, his weathered face softening with fond memories. It wasn't easy at first. The dire wolves were wild, untamed. They had never known the touch of a human hand, but we were patient, and we learned their ways. Exanth leaned forward, his compound eyes glinting with curiosity. "How did you do it? How did you bridge the gap between two species so different?" "With understanding," Coleman replied, his voice warm. "We studied them, observed their behaviors, their social structures. We learned to communicate with them, not just with words, but with gestures, with body language, and in time they came to understand us too." Kairos shook his head, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. "But to fight alongside you, to charge into battle against an enemy they had never known—" "That was the true test of our bond," Coleman admitted, his gaze distant. "When the Mizarians came, when the first shots were fired, we didn't know how the dire wolves would react. We had never asked them to fight for us before." Exanth's antennae quivered with anticipation. "What happened?" "They chose," Coleman said simply. "They saw us, their human packmates, in danger, and they made a decision. They fought, not because we commanded them to, but because they wanted to, because they knew, as we did, that we were in this together." Kairos looked out over the battlefield, where the dire wolves and their human companions continued to push back the Mizarian forces. A bond of choice, not of coercion. I never thought I would see such a thing between a sentient species and an animal. Coleman nodded, his hand resting on the shaggy head of his dire wolf companion. "It's a bond that goes beyond mere training or domestication. It's a partnership, forged in trust and respect. The dire wolves fight with us because they believe in what we're fighting for, because they know as we do that this is our home and we will defend it together." Exanth turned to Kairos, his voice hushed with awe. "A shared purpose, a common goal that transcends the boundaries of species. The humans and their dire wolves are not so different from us, Kairos. They too fight for their home, for their way of life." Kairos, his gaze still fixed on the battlefield, nodded slowly. "Perhaps we have underestimated them, Exanth. Perhaps there is more to these humans and their bond with the dire wolves than we ever imagined." Coleman smiled, a glint of pride in his eyes. "You're beginning to understand, Kairos. The bond between humans and dire wolves is not a weakness, but a strength that comes from trust, loyalty, and a shared sense of purpose. And it is that strength that will see us through this war, no matter the odds." Coleman leaned back against his dire wolf, the creature's massive head resting on his shoulder. He looked at Kairos and Exanth, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? The power of the bond between humans and animals." Kairos nodded slowly, his compound eyes fixed on Coleman. "I am, but I still don't fully understand. How can a bond with lesser creatures grant you such strength?" Coleman chuckled, scratching his dire wolf behind the ears. "It's not about them being lesser, Kairos. It's about the unique abilities each species brings to the partnership. Take horses, for example. Their speed and endurance allowed our ancient warriors to cover vast distances, to outmaneuver their enemies on the battlefield." Exanth's antennae twitched with interest. "And the falcons? What advantages did they offer?" "Falcons were our eyes in the sky," Coleman explained, his gaze distant as if recalling ancient memories. "Their keen vision allowed them to spot prey from incredible heights. In war, they were invaluable for scouting enemy positions, for delivering messages across great distances. Karos leaned forward, his earlier hostility replaced by genuine curiosity. You mentioned dolphins as well. How could creatures of the sea aid you in battle? Coleman smiled, a wistful expression crossing his face. Dolphins were our allies in the oceans, Karos. They're highly intelligent, capable of complex communication and problem-solving. In ancient times, they would guide our ships through treacherous waters, warning us of hidden reefs and impending storms. Xanth clicked his mandibles thoughtfully, each species contributing its own unique strengths to your cause. It's a fascinating concept, human. More than that, Xanth, Coleman said, his voice taking on a tone of reverence. These bonds, these partnerships, they're not just about tactical advantages. They're about trust, about mutual respect and understanding. When a human and an animal forge a true bond, it's a connection that transcends the boundaries of species. Karos, his gaze shifting to the dire wolf at Coleman's side, nodded slowly. I think I'm beginning to understand, human. Your ability to forge these bonds, to find common ground with the creatures of your world, it's a testament to your species' adaptability, your empathy. Coleman grinned, patting his dire wolf's flank affectionately. Empathy, Karos, that's the key. When we look at an animal, we don't see a lesser being, a mere beast to be dominated or controlled. We see a potential partner, a friend, an equal in the great web of life. Xanth, his eyes widening with sudden realization, turned to Karos. That's why they fight so fiercely, Karos. It's not just about survival, about defending their territory. It's about protecting their bonds, their partnerships with the humans. Karos, his voice tinged with a newfound respect, looked at Coleman. You've given us much to consider, human. Your species' ability to forge alliances, to find strength in diversity, it's truly remarkable. Coleman nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It's what makes us human, Karos. Our capacity for empathy, for understanding, for finding common ground with those who are different from us. It's a strength that goes beyond mere tactics or technology. Xanth, his gaze shifting to the battlefield where the dire wolves and their human companions continued to push back the Mizarian forces, clicked his mandibles in agreement. A strength that we Mizarians would do well to learn from, Karos. Perhaps there is more to this conflict than mere conquest and domination. Karos, his eyes reflecting a newfound depth of understanding, nodded slowly. Indeed, Xanth. Perhaps it's time we re-evaluated our approach, our assumptions about the humans and their world. Coleman's gaze held Karos's, his eyes shining with a fierce intensity. You're starting to understand, Karos. The bond between humans and animals isn't just about strategy or warfare. It's about something much deeper, much more fundamental. Xanth leaned forward, his antennae quivering with curiosity. A soul, you said, in animals. I've never heard of such a concept. Karos shook his head, his compound eyes reflecting the distant battle. Neither have I, Xanth, but the way these humans and their beasts fight together, the way they seem to understand each other on a level beyond mere training or instinct, it makes me wonder. Coleman nodded, his hand resting on the shaggy head of his dire wolf companion. That's the key, Karos. Empathy, understanding, trust. When we look into the eyes of an animal, we don't see a lesser being, a tool to be used. We see a kindred spirit, a being with thoughts and emotions as complex and valid as our own. Xanth's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. And that's what drives your bond? That recognition of a shared, what did you call it? A soul? Exactly, Coleman said, his voice soft but firm. It's the understanding that we are all part of the same web of life, all connected in ways that transcend species or origin. When we form a bond with an animal, we're not just creating a partnership. We're becoming part of something greater, something that encompasses all living beings. Karos looked out over the battlefield, where the combined forces of humans and dire wolves were driving the last of the Mizarian troops into a panicked retreat. Greater than ourselves, he mused, his voice tinged with a newfound respect. I never thought I'd hear a human express such a sentiment, but perhaps that's the true strength of your species. Not your technology, not your warfare, but your capacity for empathy, for finding common ground with creatures so different from yourselves. Coleman smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. That's what we've learned, Karos. That's the lesson we're trying to share with the galaxy. That life in all its forms is precious and interconnected. When we stand together, when we fight not just for ourselves, but for the bonds we've forged, there's no force in the universe that can stand against us. Xanth looked at Coleman, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. The dire wolves, the horses, the falcons, the dolphins, they're not just your allies, they're your family. Coleman nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon as he prepared to rejoin the fray. Exactly, Xanth. And family, true family, will always stand together, no matter the odds. That's the power of the bond between humans and animals. That's the power that will see us through this war and any challenge the galaxy can throw at us. Karos and Xanth exchanged a glance, their eyes wide with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. The idea of approaching one of the legendary war beasts of Earth, without the barrier of battle between them, seemed almost unthinkable. But Coleman's confidence was infectious, and the dire wolf beside him, though massive and imposing, seemed to radiate a calm intelligence. Slowly, tentatively, Karos took a step forward. Fenris watched him with keen eyes, his head cocked slightly to the side. As Karos drew closer, the dire wolf's nose twitched, taking in the alien scent of the Mizarian soldier. "Easy, Fenris," Coleman murmured, his hand resting gently on the wolf's broad back. "Karos is a friend now." Fenris, as if understanding his human companion's words, sat back on his haunches, his posture relaxed but alert. Karos, his heart pounding in his chest, reached out a trembling hand. The dire wolf's fur was coarse and thick beneath his fingers, the muscular body beneath, radiating a warmth that seemed to seep into Karos's very being. He could feel the power in the creature, the raw strength that had made the dire wolves such formidable opponents on the battlefield. But there was something else there too, a gentleness, a sense of connection that Karos had never experienced with any creature before. Xanth, emboldened by his comrade's success, stepped forward as well. Fenris turned his head, his intelligent eyes meeting Xanth's own. The Mizarian soldier felt a shiver run down his spine, not of fear, but of something deeper, more primal. "He's magnificent," Xanth breathed, his hand coming to rest on Fenris's flank. "I never imagined a creature could be so powerful, and yet so gentle at the same time." Coleman nodded, a smile of pride tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's the essence of the bond between humans and dire wolves, Xanth. It's a partnership built on trust, on a deep understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Fenris trusts me to lead him, to guide him in battle and in life. And in return I trust him to protect me, to stand by my side no matter the odds." Karos, his hand still resting on Fenris's head, looked up at Coleman with a new understanding in his eyes. "I see now why your species has been able to achieve so much, Coleman. This bond, this connection with the creatures of your world, it gives you a strength that goes beyond mere physical prowess." Coleman nodded, his gaze distant as if seeing something beyond the war-torn landscape of Zephyria. "It's a strength that comes from understanding, Karos, from recognizing that we are all part of the same web of life, all connected in ways that transcend species or origin. When we fight alongside the dire wolves, or any of the creatures we've bonded with, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for something greater, something that encompasses all living beings." Xanth, his voice hushed with a newfound respect, looked out over the battlefield, where the human and dire wolf forces were mopping up the last pockets of Mizarian resistance. "I never thought I'd say this, Coleman, but I envy your species. To have such a connection, such a bond with the creatures of your world, it's a gift beyond measure." Coleman's smile was warm but tinged with a hint of sadness. "It's a gift, Xanth, but it's also a responsibility. We humans have not always been the best stewards of our world, or of the creatures that share it with us. But through the bonds we've forged, the partnerships we've built, we've learned to be better, to be more than just the dominant species, but the guardians and protectors of all life." Karos, his hand still resting on Fenris's head, felt a sudden surge of emotion. Not the anger or the fear that had driven him for so long, but something deeper, more profound, a sense of connection, of kinship with the creature beneath his hand, and with the human who stood beside him. Perhaps that is the true lesson of this war, Coleman. Not that one species is superior to another, but that we are all part of something greater. That in the end, it is the bonds we forge, the connections we make, that will determine the fate of the galaxy. Coleman nodded, his eyes shining with a fierce pride. And that, Karos, is a lesson that humanity will never forget, a lesson that we will carry with us, no matter where the stars may take us. For as long as we have our bonds, our partnerships with the creatures of Earth, we will never be alone, and we will never stop fighting, for the future we know is possible. Karos and Exanth watched in stunned silence as General Zaxor emerged from the shadows, his troops fanning out behind him. Zaxor's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of Coleman and Fenris, the bond between human and dire wolf palpable even from a distance. "General Zaxor," Karos said, his voice tight with tension. "What are you doing here? The battle is over. The humans have won." Zaxor sneered, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "Over? The battle is never over until the Mizarian Empire says it is, and I will not allow these primitives and their pets to claim victory over us." Coleman stood, his hand resting on Fenris's head. "General, there's no need for further violence. Your forces are retreating. It's time to end this war and find a way to coexist in peace." Zaxor laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent shivers down Exanth's spine. "Coexist with humans and their beasts? Never. The Mizarian Empire will not rest until every last one of you is wiped from the face of this planet." In a flash, Zaxor raised his plasma rifle, aiming it directly at Coleman's chest. Time seemed to slow as his finger tightened on the trigger, the weapon's barrel glowing with deadly energy. But before Zaxor could fire, Fenris leapt forward, a snarl ripping from his throat. The dire wolf collided with the Mizarian general, his teeth sinking into Zaxor's armored exoskeleton. The two combatants rolled across the rocky ground, locked in a furious struggle. Zaxor's troops moved to intervene, but Karos and Xanth held them back, their own weapons drawn. Coleman watched helplessly as Fenris and Zaxor battled, the wolf's claws scrabbling against the Mizarian's tough hide. For a moment, it seemed that Zaxor might gain the upper hand, his powerful limbs trying to crush Fenris's body. But the dire wolf, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination, refused to yield. With a sudden twist, Fenris sank his teeth into Zaxor's throat, his jaws clamping down with incredible force. Zaxor let out a choking gasp, his struggles growing weaker as Fenris held fast. After what seemed an eternity, the Mizarian general went limp, his life extinguished by the dire wolf's unyielding grip. Fenris released his hold, staggering back from Zaxor's body. The wolf's fur was matted with blood, both his own and the Mizarian's. He took a few shaky steps towards Coleman before collapsing, his strength finally giving out. Coleman rushed to Fenris's side, gathering the wolf's massive head in his lap. Tears streamed down the human's face as he stroked Fenris's fur, his voice a choked whisper. "You saved me, old friend. You saved all of us. I'm so sorry that I never wanted it to end like this." Fenris, his breath coming in shallow gasps, looked up at Coleman with eyes that were already growing dim. The wolf's tail thumped once, twice, a final gesture of affection and loyalty. Then, with a soft sigh, Fenris closed his eyes, his body going still in Coleman's arms. The human bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as he mourned the loss of his friend, his partner, his brother in arms. Karos and Exanth, their own eyes glistening with tears, watched the heartbreaking scene unfold. In that moment, they understood the true depth of the bond between human and dire wolf, a bond that transcended species and defied all logic. "This is the price of war," Coleman said, his voice thick with grief. "The price of hatred and ignorance. When will we learn? When will we see that we're all connected, all part of the same web of life?" Karos, his head bowed in sorrow, stepped forward and placed a hand on Coleman's shoulder. "I don't know, my friend, but I do know this. The Mizarian Empire will leave Zephyria. We will not forget what we've learned here, the bond between your species and the dire wolves." Xanth, his own voice heavy with emotion, added, "And perhaps one day we'll find a way to forge bonds of our own, to build a galaxy where all species can live in harmony." As the sun began to set over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the war-torn landscape, Coleman and the humans bid farewell to Caros and Exanth. Their hearts were heavy with the loss of Fenris, but also filled with a newfound hope for the future. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.